Hey everybody, Who's Your Jedi here with another review for you. This time I'm talking Spider-Man Homecoming, and I know, I'm really late to the game here on this. But in fact, this movie actually just finally came out last week here in Japan, where I currently live. So I got around to seeing it a couple of days after it came out, and now that I've had time to sort of think about it a little bit and check what some other people had to say about the movie, I'm kind of ready to give my thoughts on it. And all in all, I thought this was a really good movie. I mean, I would probably easily say it's my favorite of the Spider-Man movies. And I feel that way basically kind of for the same reason that a lot of people do. This really does feel like the closest to the stories from the comics, especially the ones set in Peter's, very early days when he was young. I've read the vast majority of like Ultimate Spider-Man, where it does pick up where Peter's like 15 years old, when all of this happens, and that was kind of one of the things that was a little bit of a problem with some of the other Spider-Man movies with like Tobey Maguire. He moved on to college very quickly. Andrew Garfield, he was a pretty good Spider-Man, but it just didn't really feel very much like the whole high school setting was that big of a deal. Here, Peter being a high school student, that's really front and center. Now, I don't think Spider-Man doesn't work if Peter's older than that. It works perfectly well. I mean, he graduated from college. He started going to college in like the late 60s, the early 70s, and now he's an adult or somewhere in the neighborhood of 30, give or take. Comic book time. So yeah, but that's just kind of one of like him being the high school student. That is one of the more popular interpretations of Peter as a character, and here it really works so well. They really make a lot of use of the high school as a setting, and it really just does resonate so well. Um, and it really does a nice job of driving home that, hey, here's this kid who's 15 years old, and look at what he's out there doing, and look at how he's trying to balance these two incredibly different lives. And it also reminds us of the sacrifices that Peter is making to be Spider-Man. Peter could be, you know, the academic king of his school if he really wanted to be. But the demands of being Spider-Man, that takes a big toll on him, and that's always been one of the key things is that Peter struggles with his desires as a normal person and the demands of being Spider-Man. With great power must come great responsibility, and a lot of times that costs him personally, at times very dearly. And sometimes Peter does make the wrong decisions. Sometimes he does act in ways that are dumb and selfish, and that always bites him in the ass, just like it does in this movie. I'm going to keep this pretty spoiler free, incidentally. So, um, yeah, I really love Andrew Garfield as a character. I mean, as an actor portraying Peter. I mean, he just absolutely nails it. And the whole friendly neighborhood aspect of Spider-Man is just done wonderfully in this series. I love that bit where he's just like hanging out on a balcony eating and messing around on his phone, because that's stuff we've seen Spider-Man do a million times in the comics. And where he's um, just sort of chatting with people. Again, that's something that he does do sometimes in the comics. Not as much because of the whole J. Jonah Jameson giving him a bad rep thing, but here we don't have to deal with that. And it works really well. Spider-Man, he is kind of mentioned as being somebody who's a little bit closer to the ground, who has develops relationships with the people of New York. I mean, more than once in the comics, you've seen that there are like restaurants that he actually will frequent as Spider-Man. He'll take a break from swinging around New York at night, go into a restaurant where he's friends with the owner, and sit down and eat. And I've seen this multiple times. Like from like food cart vendors. There's a Chinese restaurant where he like was eating, and like Wolverine came and talked with him one time. There was another one, I don't remember who it was, which like he swung by a coffee shop and it's like, oh yeah, hey, Spider-Man's here, go get him his usual order. And I've always absolutely loved that. It just adds so much to him as a character. Um, Now, when I do reviews, I normally would like tick through all of the characters and list my thoughts on them. But for things like this, I think that perhaps maybe I'm gonna back away from that sort of method a little bit for just because there's that would we would be here forever if I did that. So let's just kind of, and ultimately at the end of the day, it's really Peter who's the character that matters because this is his story. And I do like how it's like, okay, we all know the origin of Spider-Man. We'll do a few little nods to it, but let's just kind of hit the ground running with this. And again, that's a smart move on Marvel's part. Going in there so that we can just focus on Peter's life and this journey he takes as Spider-Man. That was great, and it's a nice way of showing us why Spider-Man is Marvel's best character, why he is, their as has been said, he's their crown jewel character. Um, they did make some changes here. Like I know some people were complaining about how Flash Thompson has gone from basically being this bully jock to sort of like this academic rival of Peter's. And I'm like, well, okay, what's wrong with that? Let's do something different with Flash. And it's not as if Flash in the comics has not changed significantly from that person. I mean, last I checked, he was the host of the Venom symbiote. So you know what? I think we can kind of change it from Flash doesn't like Peter and is kind of a rival to his, and just have Flash go from being a jock to being a sort of puffed up academic wannabe. Well, so what? Um, and then like a lot of the characters that they tinkered have floating around Peter have been tinkered with. Ned Leeds seems to be more reminiscent of a character who's more connected to the Miles Morales version of Spider-Man. Michelle is very different from that character in the comics, Michelle Gonzales. Um, which I'm fine with because in the comics I really did not like the Michelle Gonzalez character, and just because she was a very very unpleasant person. I mean, just kind of give one example. There was she and Peter kind of had this relationship going on for a little while. She got mad at him, and she took a bunch of his clothes and stuffed them in the garbage disposal and shredded them. Seriously. And the hilarious thing is that she was an attorney as her day job. You would think that an attorney would realize that would count as, I believe, destruction of private property, and that Peter could totally have sicked the cops on her and probably destroyed her legal career. So yeah, not a fan of Michelle Gonzalez in the comics. Um, okay, so quick spoiler. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. One thing that I did see people get upset about was apparently that the whole call me MJ thing. Well, Marvel's gone on record and says like, no, she's not intended to be Mary Jane Watson. Not really sure exactly where they're going with this, but okay, I'm willing to roll with it. It's just that the character of Michelle, it's very obvious that she's crushing on Peter if you really stop and think about a lot of her actions. But the thing that really gets her, that I really don't like about her as a character in this movie, and this is one of my few serious complaints about the movie, is that she just basically stands around and snarks at people and looks at people, looks down her nose at others, but she has no real reason to. I mean, what exactly is she doing that's so much above them? Now, granted, she's meant to be like 15 years old, and of course teenagers act like this. This is an extremely teenage thing to do. Sort of look down your nose and think about like, oh man, everybody around me is so much more immature than me, which in and of itself is immature thinking. But still, it's just sort of like, yeah, of course you don't have any friends. You're always sort of being rude to people for no real reason, and then acting like you're all, that makes you above everybody else. I don't know. I'm not really quite sure what Marvel was trying to go for with this character, but I don't think that they achieved it. Um, my other big complaint about this movie is just kind of the pacing of it all. I mean, this is a 2.5 hour movie, as these movies tend to be these days, and that's all well and good. But there's just sort of like a lot of, all right, can we kind of get on with this? Because this whole sort of high school thing, while fun, it does tend to drag after a while. And it's just sort of like, okay, a little, let's pick up the pace, okay? Let's kind of get the main plot rolling a little bit more. But I can understand where Marvel is coming from on this one. Spider-Man is once again their crown jewel character. People have been wanting for years and years to really get that Spider-Man movie of their dreams. And while there have been many positive things to say, and more than a few negative ones about previous Spider-Man movies, Marvel is like, okay, we got this, the rights, we had to cut a deal with Sony for this, but Spider-Man is back in our house. We're gonna do this right. We're gonna give people the Spider-Man movie they want. And for the most part, they do succeed, but and they do have to sort of build this whole world for Peter to run around and play in this movie, so that we really kind of get his life. Um, but again, and all this building and all this like getting to know the characters and everything that's going on. I mean, it's really well done, but again, it just the way it takes it just does feel like this could have been paced better. And I think I'm just gonna have to leave it at that. Otherwise, I'm just gonna endlessly end up repeating myself. Um, Michael Keaton as Vulture was very nicely done. I thought that they came up with a really great take on Vulture, him as sort of this arms dealer character who has, other Spider-Man villains like Tinkerer and Shocker and Scorpion who work for him, albeit very low-level, watered-down versions of themselves because, um, we're just being introduced to these characters. But it really works very well, and it does sort of highlight in some ways that these two characters are not that dissimilar in some ways. I mean, they're both very smart people, people who have been kind of kicked around and taken advantage of by people who are higher up on the old social pecking order than they are. Vulture has a major grudge against Tony Stark, and I love the way they brought damage control into the universe too. By the way. Um, Peter is looked down on and treated as an annoyance by Happy, who, I mean, right hand man of one of the richest dudes in the world, who's also a world famous superhero. Yeah, yeah. Happy's not worrying about bills too much, I think. And what's up with that? We kind of learned that Tony does pay attention to the messages that Peter is sending to him, but apparently he doesn't pay attention to Happy being a complete and utter dick to Peter for no reason. A good old fashioned like sit down and just sort of like, okay, this is what our expectations of you are. Never mind the, okay, look, Peter, we're not really ready to fully bring you into the Avengers yet. We should probably wait to do that until you are actually legally an adult. The whole thing in Germany, that was a one-time exception. Now, okay, in all fairness, Tony does basically say, hey, Germany was kind of an exception. But still, I do really like the relationship between Tony and Peter in this movie. And the whole part where Tony says, I hoped you would be better than me. I mean, that really drives it home. And it reminds me a lot of what was said to Peter in the Ultimate Universe. I believe it was by Nick Fury, that he thought Peter had the potential not just to be a Captain America type of superhero that, people everywhere could admire for being, a good and virtuous person. Although, in all fairness, I always thought Ultimate Captain America was a serious dick. But we'll let that slide because, well, that's just sort of, he was very reflective of what was going on in America at the time, and let's just leave it at that. But it does have shades of that with what Tony is saying, which I thought was nice. And I also really like how ultimately Peter does really kind of embody what a real proper superhero should be. And if you stop and think about it, he really is one of the most genuinely straight up heroic characters in the movies. Yeah, he's made some mistakes, but for the most part, he selflessly tries to do the right thing. And if I think of any other character who's really been that selfless, the only one that really jumps to mind is Captain America. And the Captain America cameos in this movie were pretty hilarious. I liked that quite a bit. So yeah, at the end of the day, Spider-Man: Homecoming does have some flaws, but it's also by and large that Spider-Man movie that we've all been waiting for so long. And you know, like a lot of people, Spider-Man has, for me, Spider-Man has a very special place in my heart. You know, he's sort of like the first superhero that really took, I can really remember having any sort of resonance in my memory. Now, for the record, my favorite superhero is actually Superman, but that's something that kind of came to later in my life. The first superhero I have memories of is Spider-Man. My parents had a tape that I watched a million times as a kid of like the old 60s Spider-Man cartoon. I remember as a kid even singing the theme song. And even better, I actually had a great uncle who was a painter. That was his hobby. He actually his job was an artist, but he did, you know, sculpture too. Anyway, one year for my birthday when I was about 6, they actually had him paint a picture of Spider-Man and send it to me as my birthday present. And it's put away, but yeah, I still have it. It's put away, you know, in the house I grew up in. And you know, my great uncle, you know, he passed away when I was 16. But you know, I've I'm always going to have that painting to remember him by. So yeah, Spider-Man, he does have a very special place in my heart. Okay, guys, I think that's a good place to call it. So, as always, please comment, rate, subscribe, and of course, you can follow me on Twitter at Hoosier Jedi. Please also join me on Tumblr at Jedi Reviewer as well. And just so you know, I'm as the time I'm recording this, Defenders is getting ready to drop on Netflix in a couple of hours, and I will absolutely positively be doing a review for that. Uh, I'm going to try and watch it as quick as I can, but I've got a job and I've got other commitments in my life. But please do look forward to that Defenders review. I have a feeling it's going to be quite a lot of fun. So until next time, guys, take care and have a good one.